Hello everyone, and welcome to finally another rambling. I'm saying finally because I've actually had a lot more things to ramble about, but by the time I wanted to, a lot of time has already passed, so there usually wasn't like any reason to post another ramble, and now I think the last ramble has been since... Hold on, I have my browser open, let me just check for a second how long it's been. 7 months. My last rambling was 7 months ago about chapter 3, oh my goodness. Well, the main appeal of the channel has kind of been all over the place. Sometimes there's a let's play, sometimes there's a vocal cover, sometimes there's some bullshit like the ship video, and very rarely I do an animatic, which is the actual thing I should be doing, but I don't know what to do anymore. To the point that I once made a cooking video that has like 1,000 views, so you know, definitely the wrong demographic for it, but hey, you can at least try, right? I'm mostly just throwing things at the wall at this point in terms of what actually, you know, works or what doesn't. And the verdict so far has been that the vocal covers do the best, which is great and all. Terrible for monetization though. The way how quickly Flower Manga copyright claimed is actually really impressive. I could fight it, but at this point it was so damn quick that I don't know if trying to do a repeal is gonna do much, not gonna lie. My water bottle is so sticky to the tab. Why don't you let me drink? Jesus Christ. Anyways, I'm gonna assume that the replay of chapter 5 comes out before this ramble video. Maybe it will be the other way around, I don't know. Depends on how long this fucking thing takes to render, Jesus fucking Christ. But, you know, just to get everyone up to speed, after chapter 5, I had some not exactly negatively mixed feelings about it, but I remember having just a lot of things going on in my mind while I was playing it, and most of them at the very beginning were kind of negative at first. And while I was playing it, I noticed that a lot of it that I was iffy about was mostly just the expectations that I had for it. And as I was just trying to let go of these expectations, the more I started to like this chapter a lot more. And I thought, you know, originally, I was going to play every chapter leading up to chapter 5 the very next day. That was my original plan for the streaming, but in case you didn't see it, I was away when the chapter actually came out. Wait. No! Don't I'm away! No! So I couldn't really do that. So I figured I had some, you know, thoughts about chapter 5, and I think it is time to just replay all of it all at once and to see how it actually feels in combination with everything leading up to chapter 5, right? Because you've noticed at this point that I don't really game a lot. Like, even streaming is not something that I do a lot. I had like a phase with Outer Wilds, Monster Hunter, and at some point in Stars in Time. Like, those were fun to play. But as you can tell, it is difficult to do more of these kinds of streams because I'm just not someone who like just games for the sake of gaming. It's I either game all at once or I don't play at all. Like, I remember I was playing Final Fantasy VII for quite some time, like 3 weeks straight or something. And because I couldn't get through fucking Sephiroth, at some point I was like, you know what, I'm just gonna leave this for another day. And another day has turned into, I'm pretty sure, like 6 years ago at this point. Same thing that happened with Dragon Quest XI. I was at the very end of the game, like even like the second after story kind of thing, like the epilogue stuff. And I was just stuck on the final boss. And the same thing happened. I just thought I'd leave it for another day, and now it's been pretty sure like almost a decade, I think, at this point. So, you know, not exactly the most loyal gamer out there. And while I do adore things like Undertale and Deltarune, I don't really play them as much as I think everyone else does. Speedrunners are usually a bit on crack when it comes to replaying, but in terms of like serious replay, I don't really revisit them that often. And chapter 1 and 2 in particular, I haven't touched in like a year, like over a year. Like, I had played them in preparation of chapter 3 and 4, but I had also like played them a little bit away from it. Like, I don't think I played them right after the announcement. I think it was a little before that. Actually, I think I played it when I got my new PC, and that's why I wanted to replay it, right? So it's been well over a year that I played both 1 and 2. So I figured it was probably good to just, you know, refresh my memory a bit on that. So as you've probably figured, the first portion of this video is just gonna be talking about the experience of replaying replaying it. And then the next bit, that's hopefully a little bigger, is actually talking about the contents of chapter 5 and how I felt about it. And somewhere in between, I will also talk about the speed paint because I feel like I have to, considering it's just a redraw of the Sans version of it, except replacing it with flowery, but we'll get to that later. Hopefully, if I remember. If not, I'll just record again, I guess. I'll try not to drag it out too much. I do want to still have enough time to talk about chapter 5, but I do want to still go bit by bit at what it felt like playing each chapter. So, chapter 1, the very classic beginning of this entire journey. In the anniversary ramble, I did talk about how chapter 1 came out in like a really interesting time of mine where I was actually distancing myself from Undertale, and then it just, jumped into my lap and being like, no, don't abandon that hyperfixation now, get the fuck back. Fun fact, I actually went back to my Twitter and just kind of seeing if I was even remotely aware of what was happening, and apparently I actually saw the Gaster tweets and even like commented on it as I was like looking at it like 2 days before it dropped. Like I had a feeling something was coming out now or something. Like I was actually getting excited over something. And then I actually did play it the day off somehow. I don't know how. The fan art of it also was only like 2 days afterwards, which is like, that is a lot closer to the original upload than I remembered. I didn't realize I was like on the dot on this one. Now, like, I don't remember being this fucking locked in about Deltarune this early on. Anyway, so chapter 1, I think chapter 1 has always been like a very, very simple beginning, and I never really knew how to really feel about it. Like, I remember when it first came out, it was a bit of a weird experience, because it felt like Undertale, but also not at the same time. And at first, it felt like a bit of an inferior version of it at first. Because, the graphics were a bit more interesting looking. It was a bit more, you can definitely tell there were some improvements being made in terms of its visual style. But it was still like the very, very simple method that Undertale went with, right? And at the time, there was just not a lot of knowledge about where the story really was gonna go. I remember leaving chapter 1 kind of confused as to where it was gonna go from here on out, because Rouse only talked about how there was like, fountains being made and that the heroes need to prevent fountains being made, and I just completely overlooked the knight's dialogue from the king at the time. I remember just not giving a shit about that. Like, I thought it was just something random, like as a backstory drop. I don't know, I'm stupid. I was very stupid. And the chapter itself is like also like incredibly short. Like, it did take me like 4 to 5 hours to complete, but that's usually because I like to voice act my stuff, and also because I am slow as fuck. I can push on the run button as much as I can. I will still get lost very, very easily, no matter how many doors you give me, which will be relevant for chapter 5. Replaying it felt extremely nostalgic because I got to like do my little avatar again at the very beginning, which is still extremely eerie and probably still one of my favorite openings to any game ever. Just this feeling that you finally get to make your own vessel just for it to be abandoned is such a good way to introduce the very stark contrast to Undertale's previous kind of mission statement that your choices do matter, and instead going the complete opposite. I also finally got to rename my vessel into Shart. I had in previous save files called them Piss and Shit, and I didn't quite remember which one was what, which was the weird route and which one was the normal route. So now I have a middle one, which is just Shart. And so that way, I will 100% know when something is being talked about my vessel, because whatever I named it the very first time, there's no fucking way I would have recognized it, because I would have forgotten by now. Chapter 1 has this really, really interesting Alice in Wonderland kind of charm to it, and that I still appreciate to this day. But while playing it, I also reminded myself a little bit why I wasn't completely on board with Deltarune just yet. Not in the sense that I hated it, but I felt like there was something missing, and I think what still got me on board with it was just the way, the chapter ended, with the Chris smiling into the camera, throwing the soul into the birch cage and stuff. Like, that's a cliffhanger that keeps you wondering, right? But the rest of the chapter has always felt a little mellow, I guess, in comparison, and while replaying it, I've noticed that I get kind of bored rather quickly, and the only thing that that kept me kind of going was knowing that this chapter was not going to be very long. Now, I want to make it clear that doesn't mean that chapter 1 is bad. Just as a replaying experience, I felt myself getting a little bit, I don't know, a bit antsy, I guess, because I just wanted to get it over with, I guess. It's very strange because when you look at the other chapters, you realize that there's not a lot of like gimmicks happening in chapter 1 like in the other chapters where there's some other gameplay stuff happening that at least keeps you a bit engaged. This one is just straight up RPG kind of stuff, right? There's no recruitments happening, there's no weird route, there's no extra game mechanic thing that keeps you a bit more engaged, and it's also like very, very short. The castle itself is also like the most boring design of a castle, I gotta be honest. Like, it's just a bunch of a few like geometrical white lines and everything else is just black. It was a good aesthetic for how it started, but it's like honestly, I can understand why Jevil like was just in the prison instead of like outside, because the prison was so much more colorful than the rest of the goddamn castle. I would have gone insane myself if I had to live there for like 24 hours straight, right? There's, however, one thing I think in chapter 1 that I still hold really dearly, and that is Lancer. There's, of course, a lot of things going on in chapter 1 where when you look back how things started and like reflect on everything now with everything that you've learned about Susie, about Chris, about how Birdley and Noelle kind of talk to you at first, and now with all the context you know about them, things feel just a lot more different than they did the first time. And that's really cool. But I think the thing that makes me the most sad in chapter 1 while I was replaying it is how much more Lancer was prevalent, because that was like, you know, his debut. And then the more the chapters went on, he was less and less relevant for the story, which is extremely upsetting because he was like the major reason for Susie's development, right? Afterwards, Chris in a way kind of takes over that role in a sense, but the fact that Lancer is not really part of the gang as much as you would think he is anymore afterwards is just the tiniest bit disappointing, I think. Overall, chapter 1 was a fun experience, but it is definitely helped by the fact that it is just a few hours long. It's not very long in comparison to the other chapters. It's like very straightforward, because if it were longer, I think it would get boring rather fast, which is, I think, my biggest problem that I had on my replay on chapter 2, actually. Now, for context, chapter 2, I have played, I think, the most out of all the chapters, because that was the chapter that was around for the longest, right? That the first time I played it was for like the first stream of it, and that ended up having the music muted, so I replayed it again so that I would have actual working footage for it, right? And then I played it again when getting a new PC, I think. And then there were just, I think, 1 or 2 other instances where I replayed it for whatever reason. I don't remember why. And basically, I think chapter 2 I have replayed a total of 5 times or something, which is, I think, the most I've replayed any of the other chapters, which I know is like baby numbers for some people. But to me, that is quite a lot for a video game. So what I'm about to say, you should take with a grain of salt, because this very much could be influenced by the fact that I've replayed it so often. But going back to chapter 2 was, I think, the most painful in comparison to every other chapter. And that's not to say it's a bad chapter at all. I think that the chapter is very much saved by characters like Spanton and Queen. And then, of course, there's the whole thing with, you know, Noelle and Chris and their relationship, and, you know, Birdley having a lot more relevance in this chapter as well. Like, that stuff is obviously important, but in terms of gameplay, like, everything that happens between these character moments, there's just not a lot happening. That made it really difficult to get through, honestly. Like, I know a lot of people don't like the tunnel of love with Rousey and Chris, and that's actually one of my favorite moments, because you have a little bit of gameplay going on, but there's also some character stuff happening at the same time, which is why I personally still like this bit. And then literally everything else in the, like, I don't like the city section of the chapter at all. When you don't play the weird route, the city section is just kind of boring, honestly. The only thing that's really going on in the city section is just, you know, the spam characters, like, trying to sell you some scams or something. And there's, like, this car thing that you have to, like, switch on and off to, like, get through, which is kind of fun, but it's also, like, kind of nothing really. It's just about timing, I guess. And then there's, of course, the mouse puzzles, which, you know, are cute and all, but it's also, like, maybe I've replayed it too often, but to me, at least, chapter 2 was the most difficult to get through. Chapter 2, funny enough, is also, I think, to me at least, musically the weakest chapter. Yeah, like chapter 1 already didn't quite impress me with its music too much. The only songs in chapter 1 that I really liked were Versus Susie and also Scarlet Forest. Everything else was just, you know, it was good music, but it wasn't anything that I would go back to listen back to, right? Like, I know so many people really loved Fields of Hopes and Dreams. When I first heard that, like back when it came out in 2018, I actually really fucking hated that track. I can't tell you why. I've since warmed up a lot to it, like I actually do like it now, but back then, for some reason, I had an active dislike for it, and to be honest, even to this day, I'm not the biggest fan of it until the saxophone bit. Like, everything in between that doesn't have the saxophone, I don't care for. The saxophone saves that track so much to me. I think I just don't quite like the bounciness of it, that is like, you know, this Hopes and Dreams kind of aesthetic to it. I don't know. I've never really seen Hopes and Dreams and Undertale as a perfect track either. Like, I've always had not exactly negative feelings towards it. I just didn't think it was as great as I think some people think it is, I think. I like it, it's just not for me. And chapter 2 has that same symptom, I feel like, even worse, in the sense that I think chapter 2 has this very specific, you know, cyber kind of aesthetic to it in its music. And whenever it does try to implement that, that is when I would hate the soundtrack the most. And that would also be used the most for, like, you know, the guys, right? The Sweet Captain Cakes trio. Like, I want to make it clear, this is a more of a personal music taste kind of thing. But up until then, up until chapter 2, I feel like the music itself was really not all that good, to be honest. Like, it was just not sticking with me, and when it did stick to me, I just didn't really like it. And there were only really 2 tracks that I feel like were actually really fucking good in it. Like, there's some good ones that I think are good, like the Birdleaf battle theme. That one's pretty cool. I don't care for Attack of the Killer Queen. Cyber World was a really great introduction when it first came out, but the more I listen to it, the more it annoys me a little bit. Like, it's not that great to listen to be honest. And the only 2 tracks in chapter 2 that I actually really fucking love, like really, really love, is Knockout and Big Shot. Like, yes, of course, there's the introduction of the Lost Girl motive. That definitely is still, you know, worth mentioning, and it's still great, right? Knockout and Big Shot are like the only 2 tracks that I feel like are fit my music taste a little bit more. Like, there's a da 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 da. Like, it hypes me up so much more, and it actually makes me feel things as well. Like, it's like you're about to get into a battle. Like, it actually feels like it's getting me really excited. Not like Attack of the Killer Queen that feels a little bit weak to me, and Chaos King I don't like that much as a battle theme. Like, I can get into it while I'm playing it, but it also sounds a bit too similar to the area music. So first time around, I didn't even realize that it was a different remix of it, right? I didn't even notice the difference that much. Yeah, so now God actually got me excited for a fight. And then Big Shot is when I really think the game finally popped off with its music. Like, of course, there's the world revolving that finally introduced the freedom motive for the first time, or lost dream motive, I think at this point we gotta call it. Like, da 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 da. You still want to respect that. But I also have never been a fan of clown music. Is that what you can call it? I don't know, the clown music of it, like, it's fun to listen to in the battle itself, but like, as like the track in and of itself, I don't know, it's just not my thing. Big Shot, on the other hand, is really interesting to listen to, because at first it starts off with like this bum 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 bum, like almost like Mortal Kombat kind of music intro like that. And then it gets a little silly for a little bit, and then it mixes together like the silly like Spamton dialogue in there, but there's also like some anxiety-inducing instrumentals happening in the background where you can like feel the Mortal Kombat kind of bump bumps happening in the back. And then there comes the freedom motive in it that feels so dramatic. And also, you can feel a bit of tragedy in its pitch, I feel like, that you don't quite hear in Jevel's music, like, at all. Like, for Jevel, it sounded, like, really playful and, like, really fun. For Spandon, you can really feel, oh, whatever the fuck happened to him, just fucked him up for good. Like, that man is just thoroughly screwed. And, you know, there's a certain amount of sympathy you might want to reserve, considering that he's the reason that the Weird Route even exists in the first place. But you can really feel like something awful happened to this man. And the tragedy is just writing itself into the narrative and within the song itself as well. Now, which is I think why Big Shot is still my absolute favorite, like, fight theme in general, or just the best track in the entire soundtrack still. Which is extremely funny, because other than Big Shot, I feel like Chapter 2 is not that strong musically speaking, and so is Chapter 1, honestly. Anyway, to summarize Chapter 2, it is a good chapter, but has been the most painful to replay after having played all the other chapters, I think. And now, we get to Chapter 3. And this is probably going to be a bit of a controversial take because Chapter 3 is even more so now in, like, a lot of people's, like, lower rankings and chapters. And I talked about how Chapter 3 has, like, this nostalgia factor to me that just appeals to me so much that I feel like makes it a much better chapter to me because of it. So that was already a reason why I like Chapter 3 a lot more than, let's say, Chapter 2, for example. But if we're talking about pure replayability, then Chapter 3, along with 5 that I'm gonna talk about, has been my absolute favorite to replay. Yes, the boards can be a bit, long and stuff and a bit monotonous, but then in between, you get these, like, little character interactions while you play, so you can still, like, do your normal thing as doing the puzzle solves while the characters on the sofa are just, laughing at random shit for shits and giggles, right? Like, you could be, like, still solving a puzzle and Susie just throws a tube of yogurt on your face. And I really, really appreciated that part of Chapter 3 where there's, like, this combination of being able to still engage with the gameplay while also having some fun character stuff going on in between as well. And I think that summarizes the chapter really well. Like, I know some people see this chapter as, like, almost filler and that it's hard carried by character interaction, but I think that's what makes this chapter so strong to me. It has this really great balance of character stuff going on and also being so goddamn fun to replay because of all the mini games that happen in between, right? And I had a much more fun time playing through TV World than I did the other times, just because of how much more I've appreciated gameplay because of Chapter 5. Now, like, after playing Chapter 1 and 2, where it was just going very straightforward with its, story, and the fights were pretty monotonous and stuff, Chapter 3, in comparison, feels so much more engaging to replay. Now, if I were to replay it in isolation, maybe I would have a more sour feeling to it, but in combination, just replaying all of Deltarune at once, it is so refreshing to feel like you're actually engaging with the game, if that makes sense. The sword route is also, like, a lot more smoother to get through. It's not as difficult as, like, the first few times. Fuck Eram, though. That bitch somehow is harder for me to do than a fucking knight. Speaking of the knight. And so, obviously, like I should as a Deltarune fan, I also play the secret or crystal shard bosses. I need to be specific about those because people get a bit upset about that. So, of course, I fought Jevil, I fought Spamton, both in the sparring round, and then, of course, we get to Eram as the secret boss, which took me again, like, a good, like, 7 tries, I think. Which is, like, 3 tries less than normal. It's usually, like, 10 times, so it only being 7 is honestly an accomplishment. Actually, can we put the fraud allegations on Eram instead of the knight? Because Eram is only difficult because of the room that he puts himself in, right? That puts themselves in, right? Like, if the blocks or stuff didn't exist, this fight would be so much easier, but no. This bitch just puts you in a claustrophobic kind of room just to make sure that you get yourself distracted or you get stuck somewhere because the hitbox for some reason just doesn't let you through or something, and he hides himself behind like a block. Like, yeah, at least the knight is like in the full open, but yeah, sure, okay, hide yourself behind a fucking cube, fucking dumbass. And in comparison, the knight took me exactly 1 try to beat. Now, if you go to my YouTube channel, you can see my first attempt at the knight taking about 5 hours with a total of, like, I think 54 tries or something. I ended up counting 57 or something, but that was wrong. I calculated it wrong, I think. And since then, I've come back to the knight once in a while because it's actually really easy to play. Like, in comparison to every other difficult boss, the knight is actually the easiest to, like, go back to because all you have to do is, like, just open the last save from one of the chapters and stuff, and you can just keep on replaying it. And because I've replayed it so often for, like, another rambling, and also, like, played it before going on vacation, and I lost, like, 2 times before getting it on a third try. Getting it on a first try on like a replay spree without using a single revivement or a revived dust or a spin cake even. Like, as someone who sucks at video games as much as I do, that is a goddamn fucking accomplishment. I will never get no hit, and I don't care. The fact that I was able to save up all my items and ended up with like 5 revivements still at the end of it is a goddamn miracle that I'm always going to be thankful for. Anyway, the very next day, OBS just decided that the settings don't work anymore for this gift, so I had to remove it for the rest of the streams for chapter 5. And also, I don't know what happened, but the entrance of my house suddenly had like an egg hatch of like spiders, I guess. And now my entire house has like a bunch of tiny little spiders roaming around, and I just have to live with that. So I don't know if Gaster was like pissed at me being able to do that. So I guess we're never gonna do that again. I'm sorry. So yeah, chapter 3 in general had like a really good balance with like gameplay and just characters, and especially for like Tenna. Tenna is my favorite antagonist, I think. Like, I really do still really adore Tenna. Like, yes, Queen is so much more funny than Tenna, but something about Tenna and his like bastardish kind of poppy-coated mafia boss kind of aesthetic, whatever the fuck kind of vibe he has going on, it's working on me, and I love him. I have a plushie of him, and I want to hug him all the time, except his big nose makes it difficult to sometimes sleep to, so I have to put him on a podium instead. But rest assured, I give him a hug every day and give him a little kiss on the forehead. So now we get into the replay of chapter 4. Now, chapter 4, in comparison to, like, chapter 3, doesn't have as much gameplay going on, but the climbing mechanic is still so interesting to still get through, because it is still incredibly new to the game to introduce the climbing mechanic, and just trying to figure out the most optimal way to move as you're, like, trying to get up to, like, the top or something is still a lot of fun, actually. Like, you'd think you'd get bored of it, but for some reason, it's still, like, just fun going, like, hey, going up the ladders, hey, look at me go, hey. I don't know how else to explain it. It's just fun. And I still hold the belief, like, after playing all of it, that chapter 4 has still, I think, my favorite soundtrack in general. Like, Another Day in Hometown is still so pretty for me to listen to. Like, A Day in Hometown itself, like in the first chapter, was still really pretty, but Another Day in Hometown is just so happy. It's like, you can really feel like the joy happening on the piano that's being played here. Which is funny, because I didn't even notice this Snowden motif at first, and it was only when I replayed it a year ago, not in this replay, a good while ago before, only then did I actually notice this Snowden motif, and it was like, huh, yeah, that explains why I like it so much. It just has this happiness to it that's just so nice to get through. Castle Funk is also so much better than the normal Castletown kind of music that's usually going on. Castle Funk is, I think, the first music that the Sweet Captain Cakes make that I actually enjoy, and it's actually really fun to, like, get into Castletown and see what else has changed and stuff, right? Actually, this is a complaint that I've seen a lot, which is that the dojo doesn't really have much going on for it, or that Castletown in general doesn't really expand as much as you would think it does. And in particular, it's being discussed about, like, the dojo not really adding new challenges that are, like, actually, you know, expanding more upon it. And I do get the complaint about it. Like, I think there should be a bit more challenges on the dojo, but I also think if there are challenges on the dojo, it has to be something else than just fights, I think. Like, I know this is, like, the whole point of the dojo and stuff, so that sounds, like, contradicting and stuff, but while I was doing the dojo, I noticed myself getting bored, like, really fast. And there's the fun thing with Elena and Lanino doing, like, the umbrella thing that makes it a bit more fun, and Task Manager that you have to, like, be a bit more specific to how you move. There's this Grace thing that was, like, from chapter 2 that was kind of fun, but if it's just in the form of, like, you know, in a battle, I feel like there needs to be quite a bit of innovation in order for it to actually be fun. Like, I'm gonna be so dead ass. I don't think an all-stars kind of battle in the dojo would make it better. I think it would actually make it worse. I think it would just feel so lazy, and I don't think I would personally enjoy it that much. If there's just a bit more going on than that, that would be one thing. But if it's literally just fighting enemies you just fought in the previous chapter, like, unless they're, like, super fucking hard, then it could be, like, fun. But right now, it just doesn't make sense to, like, do that, especially because all the bosses have, like, a very specific scenario as to why they're happening in the first place. Like, imagine they wanted to do an all-stars of all the, like, the final chapter bosses or something. How do you explain that Flowery is back? or that Tenna like comes back for a little bit. And that's not even acknowledging like the secret bosses that I feel like, I don't know, there was something fun about trying to solve the puzzles and trying to get to these bosses and then trying to beat them in this specific scenario. I feel like the dojo doesn't really benefit much from just replaying old fights all that well. I don't know if this sounds weird. This is probably the most LARPer gamer kind of opinion ever, but I feel like there could be done more with the dojo, but if it is the same as it has been presented so far, then I think it's not worth putting time into it, and I think that's maybe the thought process that might be going on with Toby. You have to also think about that the Castle Town is not somewhere you're supposed to like spend that much time on. You're supposed to just, have some fun interactions, have some fun like talking to other NPCs and all that. And I keep seeing how everything just changes and just like a little temporary hub you go into before you actually go into the main action. That's how I have always seen Castletown, which is why I've never really felt it was a problem that it kept changing and sometimes removes or adds things in between. Like, I feel like that's the point of Castletown, that it keeps changing, that you need to appreciate how things are while you play the chapter, because if you don't do it then afterwards it's too late. And now there's some other thing happening because the citizens are always going to do something new with the place. And honestly, this might age badly afterwards, but the reason why I don't think the area of Castletown expands itself much is maybe because that's the point. For the record, I understand that just because something is the point doesn't mean it's good, right? I understand that. But I do wonder if there's gonna be a point in the story where the story acknowledges that Castletown cannot take in every single Darkener into it. Because if you think about it for just a little second, there's not that much that can like fit into the supply closet eventually. Like, realistically, if there's ever like a light turned on in the closet or something, there needs to be enough objects that can actually be held in this room. So to me, it actually kind of makes sense that eventually they'll just straight up run out of space for all the people inside of that very closet, right? So the claustrophobic nature of Castletown might be actually intentional, potentially. That's more of a theory than anything. So don't take this bit too seriously, I guess. But, that's the feeling that I get whenever I am in Castletown, where it's not really meant to be somewhere I'm supposed to spend a lot of time in to, like, do challenges and all that. It's just supposed to be like, we're here for a little bit, let's have some fun, and then after we have a little bit of a break, we can now get into the proper action, right? Like, do you remember, here's an example. Do you remember in Pokemon whenever there's, like, a casino game or something? I think in, God, what was it? I think it was in Heart and Gold, where there was this one game with like the exploding Pokemon ball. What was it? What was it called? I forgot. But the angry Pokeball thing. There was like a specific game to it or something, and I spent so much time on that I ended up not really playing the game properly until like I think a good few days or something. I was just stuck with this specific minigame. And if I had to take a guess why Toby isn't focusing on like these minigames, is so that people like me don't do that, right? That they're just stuck in Castletown and don't engage with the rest of the story whatsoever. But that's just a theory. A game theory, you might say. I don't know why I dramatically opened my water bottle, you wouldn't even be seeing that. Speaking of getting stuck in Castletown, we've only talked about like Castletown for like, I think like 10 minutes right now. My bad. Anyway, so chapter 4, in terms of replayability, is interesting because the first half is like basically just being in the light world, right? That you get to know about the church thing that's going on. Susie gets attached to Toriel a lot more ever since like chapter 2's ending, right? You get to explore the entire town again and talk to Sans and have to just sit there growling inside of your head, just molding over the fact that Papyrus is still nowhere to be seen. And then you have to just entertain this fuck-ass bitch with his clopen-ass bit. I don't know why I say that so angrily. I really love this bit so much. Like, it's the first time in the chapter, I think, you get to, like, really sit back and just enjoy the town itself, just to have a bit of a better idea what the town itself is like, what Burger Pants is up to, the diner, having a little bit of a conversation with the other characters in the church itself as well, how Birdley is doing afterwards, depending on the normal route or the weird route, you know, those shenanigans. I'm not gonna talk about the weird route too much because, I didn't really replay them while I was doing this replay thing, but I will address it when talking about chapter 5. And of course, you get the Holiday Mansion, which gives you like a good idea of Noelle herself. Like, we get a little bit more development on her side as well that we hadn't had since chapter 2. And that scene in and of itself, like, you know, there's two sides of the Holiday Mansion, which is one, you know, the soul and Chris being separated, and you learn the whole thing about Chris being in cahoots with the Knight or something, and also doing something with Carol potentially. And then the other side, of course, is Susie and Noelle getting really, really close. Now, I've talked about this in my shipping video, but I think these two work really well, and you could already tell from chapter 2 that these two were like getting a lot closer, and chapter 4 really shows how much chemistry these two really have, just enforcing everything that was happening in chapter 2. The only thing that is just a bit frustrating in hindsight is that I don't think Toby and his team quite used the right sprites to really convey that Susie was having a crush on Noelle as well, because it gave so many people the weird impression that Susie was not into Noelle for some reason. And that is just kind of baffling to me, because when you look at all the scenes in the Ferris wheel and stuff, like, add a single line of blush or something, and then you immediately see the Yuri being involved here, right? Guys, let's not be fucking stupid about this. This has been obvious since basically chapter 2 from the beginning, okay? So there's that whole thing, and that really keeps you engaged. Just seeing how these two interact with each other, but also having this weird dilemma going on with Chris now, like, hold on, what the fuck is going on with them right now? And it's, of course, there where we get the setup with Asgore, where, hold on, something's up here. And that's even without going into like the tunnel or something, because that is like, you know, very easily missable. At least it was to me. I completely missed the Asgore thing the first time around, so you know, that shows you how my gaming intelligence. What is the most important part about the mansion though is when we finally get introduced to Carol, who looks nothing like any fan interpretation of Carol I had seen at the time. Like, so many people had her, like, you know, in a pretty, you know, decent, like, office outfit. Like, everyone predicted that. I don't think a single person was prepared for Ice Queen Margaret Thatcher to show up on the door. And now, don't get me wrong, crackable as fuck. But it was really interesting to see how different Carol is, like, designed than what we expected. And there's just a lot of confusion right now as to the kind of characterization that Carol really has. Now, in terms of confusion, it's more so like people mischaracterizing, but I can also understand why it's maybe a bit difficult to pinpoint her deal right now, because we literally only had one scene with her so far. And we'll talk about the oddity of that in chapter 5, but finally getting introduced to basically the source of all Noelle's problems, basically. Well, not all of them, but, you know, a good chunk of it. You know, it was still pretty fucking intimidating, and I still appreciate the atmosphere behind it, right? Anyway, so that was the first part with the light world, and then we get into the dark world. And I think the dark world in chapter 5 is really interesting, because while gameplay-wise, there's not that much happening except for, like, the climbing, which is, again, really fucking fun, and very different from everything that we were able to do beforehand. But the dark world in chapter 4 is also, like, you don't notice it at first, but it's, like, really fucking small. Like, if we compare it to, like, for example, chapter 5 that has, like, 16 fucking doors or something, like, goodness fucking gracious. Chapter 4, first of all, it doesn't have any doors, and when it does help you backtrack, that only really happens once you get into, like, the third sanctuary, like, for the third dark world. Like, before that, you don't really get that at all, except if you, like, die to Gerson or something. Now, well, no, actually, you get that also when you die to Jackenstein, but the point is, the dark world is, like, very easily backtrackable. Like, it's not as grand as the other ones, and at first it might seem a bit disappointing because, you know, a lot of people had, like, you know, concepts and ideas about what the church would look like, and I do agree that maybe it could have been a bit bigger, or at least that we would get to, like, the graveyard side of it. Like, that would have been really cool. But I think the point of chapter 4's dark world is that this is, like, the beginning of the prophecy, right? This is, like, like the beginning of everything, which is why I think it's like so simple and there's almost nothing quite in it just yet. And whether or not that's a good enough justification for it or not is up to you. I think it makes sense for it to be rather simple and mostly being carried by just the fucking aura of a church. Look, Chapter 5 is beautiful, but I will already say, I think the aesthetic of Chapter 4 is just fucking unmatched to me. The church is just something that just cannot be fucking defeated, and that's also part of the reason why Chapter 4's soundtrack is so much better to me in comparison to like every other chapter, because church is fucking unbeatable to me as like a fucking aesthetic, right? Now, I am atheist. I don't really care about like religion whatsoever, but you have to respect the fucking aura farming that churches are able to do. Like, have you ever been inside a church? Even if you are not a non-believer, you can feel something's in there. I don't know what is in there, but it's potent. And that is also completely ignoring the absolute delight that is having seen the return of Gerson. I know we all have been kind of waiting for characters like Sans or something to, you know, make a return into the battlefield or something, but there is something extremely special for a character who we have always wanted something from, but was always like in the background, to be a fucking secret boss. Is so fucking cool, man. Like, there's nothing like the feeling of figuring out that Gerson was the guy, right? And even without the secret boss, he is still the guy that gives you the most motivation. Like, I've seen this opinion from some people that Chapter 4 is much weaker without the secret boss, and that it feels really stupid that his development is basically locked behind a secret boss. And I disagree on that, because when I first played Chapter 4, couldn't find the extra climbable wall to solve the piano puzzle, because I don't know, I just got lost very easily. For some reason, I just couldn't find it. I don't know why. Yeah, I just couldn't. Like, the Dark World is not that huge, but for some reason, I just couldn't find that fucking wall. I don't know why. I played it without having the secret boss of Gerson, and it still hit very hard for me, and that's for a very simple reason, because of the scene that we have after Jackenstein fight. Because if you really think about it, everything that you kind of get from the Gerson fight is encapsulated in that little dialogue between Susie and Gerson. Like, of course, there's the whole thing about like fate and wanting to fight it in some way, or like writing your own story. But if you think about it for a little bit, Gerson basically motivating her to still use the healing and trying to practice and really showing her, you know, colors in it, that's essentially the same thing. She's coming out of it with the same kind of lesson to keep on trying, keep on holding on to this hope and holding on to this determination, to actually defy this notion that she's like stuck in this box or something, and that she can still do whatever the fuck she wants by blasting her healing magic, and in the process was able to heal Jackenstein, which shows again that she can get out of this notion that she can't be more than what she is right now. That she is destined to be much more. Sure, the secret boss adds a lot more context to the prophecy, that is true, and, you know, it still adds a lot of, like, stuff, especially with, like, foreshadowing for Chapter 5. Let's not ignore that. But I severely disagree with the idea that without the secret boss, it feels weaker, when, no, that's just the base of the story, and that the secret boss enhances it. Because I did not have this feeling of disappointment when I couldn't find Gerson. And so, at least, personally, I don't agree with this notion. And, you know, towards the end of Chapter 4, you get really this amazing sequence of, like, actually climbing up and all that, which is incredible to just get through. The fight with the Guardian is also, like, fucking amazing, especially when you realize that Jackenstein has been foreshadowing this, like, the entire time. And the fact that Gerson has been telling us the fucking answer to how to defeat the Titan from the very get-go by just turning on the fucking light. Like, I still can't fucking believe that. Answer was right there on plain fucking sight, man. And that brings us to Guardian, right? The soundtrack of, like, the Titan fight. Now, the Titan fight itself is really fun. Normally, I have, like, no problem with it, but for some reason, I don't know, I guess I played wrong or something. Like, I didn't really do as well in it as I usually do. Like, I did it still in my first try, but I also wasted a lot of items, none of the important ones or something, but it was weird how much difficult the Titan fight was on a replay in comparison to, like, every other time. I don't I don't know what happened there. I guess I got performance anxiety. I don't know. Guardian is, I think, my second favorite, like, boss track in general. Like, if we're, like, including, like, Big Shot or something. If we don't, then Guardian is still my favorite boss theme. Now, Chapter 4, in general, was really interesting to play through, because unlike Chapter 3, that had so much character stuff where it is interwoven with its gameplay, Chapter 4 had stuff going on as, like, a bit of a more laid-back approach at first, in the first half with the Light World, and in the second half with the Dark World. First of all, it was shorter. It was a lot more easy to track back, except I was an idiot the first time around, but let's ignore that. For the replay, it's, like, really short. It's really easy to get through places, and the atmosphere is so strong that even when, you know, not much happens and you're just doing the typical fights and stuff, you can still feel the aura of it, that it keeps you engaged heavily, to me at least. That even if gameplay-wise not much was happening, knowing where it leads to makes the journey so much more worth it. But of course, we can't be talking about Chapter 4. We're at the end of Chapter 4. The actual end. Not the boss end. The actual end. You know what I'm talking about. Well, two facets of it, of course. There's the walk back home, which has the fucking bombshell on it that is the place where it rained, which is, like... I remember someone trying to convince me, at least, that the place where it rained is more so the theme of Chris and Susie, and I would agree with this. If right after you get this track, you immediately transition to the Jitterbug scene, which is the second thing that we need to talk about, of course, in Chapter 4. Now, while I would like to talk about it in isolation, I think this time we do need to consider Chapter 5 a little bit, because Chapter 5 gives a little bit of context as to what actually happened, as to how it led up to, like, this moment, right? Because in the beginning of Chapter 5, which, by the way, thank fucking God Sans wasn't in the house, because I don't think anybody in the fandom would have survived that if he was actually in there. Like, I was so happy to be wrong about this. Like, him just not being in the house at all for this was honestly a blessing in disguise. Anyway, when you get to Toriel, you have the option to ask her about either about the fact that you were locked out or the fact that they were loud. And when you say that you were locked out, Toriel talks about how there is a spare key that Chris could have easily found, which is interesting. Because not only does this show that Toriel was not under the impression that she locked them out, which already removes, like, a good chunk of the hatred people used towards Toriel, but it also recontextualized the fact that Chris made it a priority to go to the church immediately rather than wait around for it anymore. Now, like, they basically wanted to make sure that they went to the church Dark World instead of just sticking around at home, which is interesting to me. But as the conversation goes on, you also learn that Toriel was actually calling Chris, but Chris wouldn't obviously answer because they deleted all their contacts and stuff. So it does show that she, like, cared a lot, right? And she was going to look for us, but because of Sans, who mentioned that Chris was with Susie, she decided that she was not going to worry about it anymore, right? And I think... How do I say this without sounding misogynistic? I think there is some nuance to be had about this whole situation, because I think just because she did try to call them and that she was, reassured by Sans that Chris was with Susie, that doesn't immediately mean that she didn't have a lapse of judgment happening here. Like, I think there was still a bit of a flaw happening with Toriel. Now, I want to make it crystal fucking clear that Toriel is a good mom and she tries her fucking best and I love her and I will defend her whenever necessary, especially in context of people trying to uplift Asgore by being misogynistic towards Toriel. I still fucking stand by that. But we still need to acknowledge the fact that she was still drinking up until like 1 a.m. or something, right? And look, I don't know about you, but there is a certain limit as to how long you want to not care where your child is up until a certain point. Like, I've seen a lot of people think that it is actually pretty normal when kids are just kind of hanging around with their friends and then just don't contact them for a long time. Like, I understand that this is probably a good way to, like, teach them independence, but 1 a.m., guys. Like, I know we all are, like, nocturnals or something and like to stay up for a long time, but that is quite late, right? We're all in acknowledgement that 1 a.m. is a late time to come back home. Like, even if it's, like, in the context of, like, a weekend. If you remember, Toriel did ask Susie to, like, contact her parents first before, like, sleeping over or something, which, she didn't, she just assumed that Susie would do that, right? She just assumed that she probably, like, contacted them or something. I did the same thing with Susie, just not telling my parents, and I regretted that deeply. Still, to this day, I think about it at night, about how pissed my mom was about not contacting her, right? Anyway, so that tells me that Toriel does want to, like, still get communication done before actually committing to something as, like, having someone just stay over or something. And I think no matter how much she trusts Susie, I think she would want the same thing from Chris, right? To just know where they are, or that Susie and Chris are just, having a better time together or something, or, like, having contact with their parents or something, right? The fact that she was, getting herself blackout drunk without, like, making sure that her children were in fact okay, I think is still a flaw on her. Now, I'm not going to say that it was, like, terrible or something, or that it makes her a terrible mother, but I don't think we want to lose the nuance of the situation too much and let her get off the hook completely, I think, on this, in that regard. Like, what she was doing essentially was getting an explanation from Sans and basically using that as, like, an excuse to, like, avoid thinking about it, in a sense. And instead of, like, trying to be, a bit more rational about it and having, like, a healthy amount of, trust in Chris and Susie, just kind of lets herself go. And that's not how you want to approach it, I think. So I want to make it again clear. Toriel is a great character and a great mom who tries her best. Let's, however, not completely ignore that her being fucking drunk off her ass without really checking up on Chris afterwards, after, like, let's say, like, 11 p.m. or something. Like, at this point, she should, figure that maybe it would have been time to, like, actually, like, go out and look for them, right? Like, I think you can still criticize her a little bit, just some of the guilt or the blame is definitely shifted off from what we thought it was. Like, it's not as bad as we thought it was, but it wasn't great either. Okay? Are we good on that? Can we move on from the subject? Honestly, in general, I was actually kind of surprised and maybe at first kind of disappointed that the whole thing with Sans didn't really carry out too much in chapter 5. But then you notice a few details in the kitchen where he actually took out his ketchup from there. The sink is, like, completely cleaned and all that. And with how hungover Toriel is, you can definitely tell that was not because Toriel did anything, right? So it's interesting that you can still see that Sans, at the very least, is, like, pretty decent. Like, he actually did take care of the house a little bit. Before fucking off. Anyway, so I think this is where we can start, like, almost talking about chapter 5, because the end of chapter 4 is really interesting, because it gave a lot of people the impression that, including me, that Toriel and Sans were probably gonna have, like, a pretty big role in conjunction with Asgore. Maybe not necessarily in, like, the jealousy aspect of it, but it seemed like something that would probably, like, carry over, right? And instead, Toriel wasn't even in the chapter, minus, like, the beginning of it. And if I had to guess why that is, it's not that Toriel or Sans, like, hanging out like that wasn't important or something. Like, I feel like it is going to come back later. But I think they're gonna do a similar thing to, like, chapter 2 and 4, where Noelle wasn't really relevant for chapter 3, but then became irrelevant again for chapter 4. And I think it's gonna have a bit of a similar method where, obviously there was this whole thing with Asgore that needed to be, like, dealt with and stuff. And now, in chapter 6, or the final one, there's gonna be only a few characters that you can still interact with that would get involved with this. That leaves Carol, potentially, that leaves Noelle, that might leave, potentially, Birdly, but it's not clear. And then, of course, there is the, almost kidnapped character, Toriel. And those three seem to be, like, the most likely to have, like, things going on again later in the story. And that feels like that's where Sans might come back in the story again. Maybe not, like, a huge, big part of it. Like, I still don't think he's gonna be a major part of the story necessarily. But I think he is going to still be important, especially when it comes to, like, Toriel's behavior, I think. So ever since I recorded the last part, it's been 4.5 hours now. I think it's actually been 5 maybe. I don't know at this point. Look, I have to mentally prepare myself to actually talk about chapter 5 for a minute, okay? So there's not really much to say about the festival bit of the chapter 5. My biggest relief with, Sans was just kind of, taken care of right from the get-go, just shot in the back alley or somewhere. So that wasn't something that I needed to worry about anymore. And so the rest of it was just kind of chill, just going through hometown, getting a bit more death lore, getting Deathrail confirmed, I guess. It's a bit of a stain on my shipping video now, but it's funny, honestly. Not much really happens until you get to like the Closet Dark World, and there you just have some fun shenanigans. First time around, I tried to actually put some effort in how to like dress up as Susie and how to make her look butch and kind of cool anyway, but also have a bit of elegance to it. And on my replay, I figured, what, doesn't really matter anymore. Everything is completely pointless, so might as well give her a duck costume in a top hat. Now, I didn't really do much in the Dark World. Like, I did have all the interactions, but I couldn't get myself to get through the trash trio because I was just struggling on that, and I decided, you know what, I'm going to leave that for a replay, and then I did, and I actually did in fact die to that one and even wasted items on this. It is embarrassing to say, yes, but I will count it as a success considering the freedom motive is on there. Sorry, the Bat-Tat motive, as they called it. So I want to say it was intentionally just a little bit difficult, alright? No, I don't care about anybody saying that it was piss easy. I don't need to hear that from you, okay? I had a good streak with the secret bosses, and this one just ruined it. Shut the fuck up and just leave me alone! Other than that, it was just kind of fun to see everyone in the castle town. Just seeing everyone, how they're adjusting to the Dark World. Having Ralsei's room actually look like a proper room, that was nice. On my first play, I had the save file where I gave the plushie to Susie. But on my replay, I gave it to Ralsei. And there is a little bit of regret on that now, because I forgot that the nuzzle thing doesn't really happen if the Susie plushie isn't around. But I also think if I had known from the start that Ralsei's room was gonna be empty as fuck in chapter 4, then I would have given him the plushie right off the bat anyway. So I think for my replay, sacrificing the nuzzle was worth it. Speaking of nuzzling, while not much has happened in the beginning in chapter 5, the amount of times that I wanted to just scream shut the fuck up at every single thing that Asgore said about, Ralph, about Asgore and Asriel and stuff being royalty, like I just wanted to scream at that one. I think it was pretty obvious from pretty much the get-go that this was going to be very heavily Undertale referenced and probably going to have the most Undertale references out of all the chapters, that this was like a freebie for everyone. And I think we can positively say that we were all right about it. It just maybe not exactly how we thought it was gonna go. Genuinely, it was just kind of fun to get into it and just having no idea what anything was gonna happen. Like, as I said, I went into this completely blind and just cut off my entire social media to experience this completely blind. So I had like zero idea what was expecting me, and I was just kind of, holding my seat to anything that would like, jump on my face. And, the most dangerous things like, the Toriel discussion or whatever was fortunately being a bit shoved to the side, so this was not going to be like addressed whatsoever. And honestly, I had a sigh of relief on that. I still feel like it was probably like intentionally trying to give you a bit of a misdirect, but I do think that it was probably not supposed to be as big of a deal of a misdirect as Toby intended it to be, or at least as much as we, perceived it. Like, if you remember, chapter 3 and 4 were supposed to go along with 5, and so I feel like there was a little bit too much overemphasis on, like, the final scene of chapter 4, thinking that it was going to be much more prevalent in transition right into the next chapter than we thought it was gonna do, and, this is one of the reasons why I wanted to replay, to see what that feels like, and having a replay it again, you can really tell that it wasn't meant to be that important. It was just something that was happening in between that does tell a story, of course, but it wasn't meant to be like something that lives rent-free in your head for like a year or something, right? Anyway, that being said, the festival itself ended up being, I'm gonna be honest, a little bit of a letdown. Now, I feel like I am a lot more lenient on the things about chapter 5 than I think most people have been. And, it's been 2 weeks. So I think everyone has gotten like their biggest takes out the way, and most of the discussions have kind of calmed down about it. But if I were to say one thing that I am still kind of disappointed about is how the festival has been interweaved with everything. Like, it is important to a degree because it gives us the opportunity to like hang out with Noelle and Susie, right? And we finally get to see them actually, being together and actually going into the festival, as an actual date. And I think that really does matter in the grand scheme of things, right? That being said, I feel like the festival, like, the height of the festival, really, in terms of, like, activity, was really, the fucking Burger Pants subplot. Which I honestly thought was gonna, go on for a lot longer than just, immediately going from chapter 4. Which, honestly, in contrast to, like, Toriel, that is a very funny parallel, that one of them got kind of ditched to the side, meanwhile the other one has, like, so much drama happening the very next day that I appreciate that. That being the main highlight of the festival is honestly a little disappointing because I kind of expected a bit more. And when they talked about like the festival king and queen or something, I got so excited about that one because I felt like maybe that would cause like a little bit more drama. But no, we don't get any of that, and that makes me kind of sad. When I played the first time, I obviously made Noelle and Susie play the hammer game, before knowing about Chris's whole thing. Yeah, that I am so sorry, my non-binary pal. I had no idea. I'm very sorry. Like, I knew something was going on from chapter 3, like the poll, but I didn't even think it was that serious. I'm sorry. So I didn't realize that the only way you can actually quote unquote play the hammer game is if you do it with Noelle and Chris. So these two would do the hammer game instead, and there you actually have to put some, minimal effort into actually, hitting it right. And that's kind of it. Now, having seen the size of chapter 5's Dark World, like the main Dark World, I can kind of understand the logic behind it, but considering, festival as like a theme, you'd think that there would be more to do in it, and I guess I'm being a bit hypocritical because I think that Dojo doesn't necessarily need more to it, but like the festival is like a one-time thing, like a one-time party thing that you could be doing that is just something fun to do before the main action or something. And the fact that there was just not much to do in the festival in and of itself is a little bit weird. Not to mention that the festival theme in and of itself doesn't really carry over much to the main Dark World itself. Like, yes, it's like, Dark World but Japan thing. That's like really fun and stuff, right? But the festival theming of it just didn't quite carry over, and maybe someone can like point out, oh wait, actually it did take over or something, but if it was, I didn't see it, or at least it wasn't very obvious to me, at least. Like, I don't know, I feel like it was put under the radar a little bit. That, of course, doesn't mean that nothing important happened during the festival or anything like that. It was mostly like towards the end that got important because of the beautiful, Suzelle that we got towards the end, which I still think was honestly so sorely needed, just to see this outward affection from Susie to really hammer it fucking home that yes, Susie in fact likes Noelle. That I am still in disbelief that people thought was not a thing. Like, I don't think I've seen this much, like, fandom delusion about this in my goddamn life, actually. But if we're really talking about a massive lore bombshell that's not in the Dark World, it obviously is the fucking punch card moment. Now, I am aware that there is a group of people who are playing Deltarune that haven't played Undertale yet and don't really know much about the game that much either. So, just in case to, bring everyone up to speed, let me explain why the punch card is important. Now, I'm sure most people know, but just for anyone who doesn't, let me just give you a very quick summary. Yeah, so in the pacifist run in Undertale, you have the option to reload over and over in Judgment Hall with Sans. And at some point, Sans will notice that you have probably seen this shtick before because you seem a little bored, right? If you do it often enough and call yourself the legendary fart master, he gives you the key to his room. And in that room, you find another key. And that key unlocks the door to a lab-like room. Now, normally when you go into the room, you can inspect the, the drawers to see what else is in there. And one of them is like a badge, one of them is like a blueprint and all that. There's like a machine that's like covered, but you don't know what it is. And then there's one that is like a binder with a bunch of photos of people that you don't recognize. However, there is a fun value chance that in Waterfall, where you find Undyne's and, Nafsiblook's house and all that, etc., the place, you can find a clam monster who talks to you about some monster called Susie, like someone from like a city or something. If you interact with that clam monster and then do that whole shtick with Sans and then get into the lab, the folder dialogue changes. And instead of going through photos of people you don't recognize, there is a drawing that sticks out of 3 poorly drawn on people. And for a very, very long time, this was assumed to be Susie, Ralsei, and Chris, but there wasn't any concrete evidence. So, imagine my surprise when I'm just having a nice time playing my chapter 5 finally, just looking around, and of course, because I am a brain-rotted Sans fangirl, I just went to Sans immediately because I had to see what he had to say. Not even realizing that the ice cream dialogue was gonna be mandatory. Like, I didn't even realize we had to go there anyway. I'm just having a nice time buying the ice cream, and then suddenly Sans just asks Susie to fill out this punch card, drawing her friends on it. And you can see in real time the gears turning in my brain and suddenly having an aneurysm in the moment. And frankly, I would have gushed about this the entire fucking stream if there wasn't a fucking spider in the middle of it just crawling on my wall, ruining this moment for me. I am never forgiving that fucking spider ever in my fucking life! You know, that crush out aside, this was definitely one of those things that I really wanted to see how other people reacted. So after this happened, I was honestly so excited to see how people reacted to this, because I never clocked something as quickly as I did this, and I really wanted to see how people, you know, discussed about this, because this was huge, right? Until I realized, upon finally opening my Twitter after the playthrough for the first time, that there was a little bit of controversy over this. Well, controversy is maybe the wrong word, but there is a bit of disagreement as to what that means. So apparently there is a little bit of a wording issue that I feel like everyone is kind of headbutting against what that means, right? Because on the normal route, Sans tells Susie to like draw her friends on it or something, right? And then in the weird route, he tells Susie to draw her and her friends on it. So it's a different wording in that kind of case, right? And the reason why this is important is because when Ralsei doesn't do the whole ice cream bit, then the wording almost implies in the normal route that Susie's only drawing Noelle and Chris because, you know, those are the only 2 people that are with her right now, which makes the note impossible to be the one from the lab. At least that's the argument. Or that if Susie is being drawn on regardless, then the assumption would be that if Ralsei is being included, then it would be Noelle, Chris, Susie, and Ralsei. And some people have taken this as evidence that the weird route is actually the one that's canon to Undertale. Look, I absolutely hate the argument of like the curtain is just fucking blue, whatever, because it destroys discussions about media. This is, I think, the one time, genuinely, where I think this was just a wording issue. Now, of course, there is definitely an intentionality between changing the phrasings, but honestly, I think it has more so to do with the amount of people that were with Susie, I think, that changed the actual dialogue a little bit and doesn't actually matter as much as I think people think it does. Let me try to explain it. In the normal route, Noelle and Chris are, you know, with Susie, so Sans most likely what he meant with like, you know, you should draw your friends on it. What I think he meant is that that she should like draw herself along with her friends on the card, but doesn't feel the need to like you know, mention that, because of course if she has the punch card, if she's the one that should like theoretically get more ice cream, then of course she would draw herself on it as well, because that's hers. Meanwhile, in the weird route, it's only Chris that's with her, right? And so I feel like there, it makes no sense for Sans to just go draw your friends because it's just one person. So I think what he would mean in that context is that, you know, there's Susie, so he's saying, oh, you should draw yourself and whatever friends you want to put on there as well. Just so it's not just 2 people on the card and he actually just wants to have like more people on the card or something. That's, I think, what the wording is meant to invoke, but I also understand someone listening to this and feeling like it might be a bit of a shaky explanation. And I'm going to get into why I think this way, or at least why I would want it to be this way. But I do want to talk about how I interpreted like the whole dialogue in general. So the most common assumption that people make that I've seen is that Susie will draw herself, Noelle, and Chris, like if Ralsei didn't say anything. And then when Chris mentions that Ralsei wants to be included in like the ice cream thing, that's when Susie replaces herself with Ralsei. So instead of like being Noelle, Susie, and Chris, it would be Noelle and Ralsei and Chris. And then the point where she's like involved is the fact that she's the one drawing it, right? And that makes enough sense. Now this is how everyone else looks at it. And the way that I looked at it is that the impression that I had with like specifically things like the chapter 4, where we got so much interaction between like Chris and Susie, right? The impression that I got is that no matter what happens within the day or the plot, Susie will always want to be paired with Chris in like a friendship matter, but maybe a bit more than that. Or but a little less than anything else. You know what I mean, right? Like to her, these two are so close and just close buddies that do everything together. So to me, it makes a lot more sense for Susie to draw herself and Chris right off the bat immediately, and then whether or not Ralsei brings in the ice cream or not, that's when she would make the decision to either include Noelle or replace Noelle with Ralsei. Now, I love Suzelle, and I think these two girls are so in lesbian with each other, and I support them 100%. But we have seen in chapter 4 how much Susie wants Ralsei to get like included, and because of how, impulsive she can be and immediately want to draw herself and Chris because they're close buddies, it makes sense to me that in the moment at the very least, she would prioritize Ralsei to feel included over including Noelle in the moment. Now, I understand the explanation that someone is probably going to give, that Noelle would have said something if she didn't actually need to draw her, but also at the end, Sans doesn't even give us the fucking punch card, he just keeps it to himself. And honestly, if there ever is like another patch, like another update, I am begging Toby to just show what the note looks like, just so that there's some clarification. Because I genuinely think that there's always 3 people on the note, no matter what. And here's the explanation why. I think, after having had so much of an emotional roller coaster just clocking in my head what that punch card is, it would suck so fucking bad that in this moment of a revelation, the route I was playing this on didn't fucking mean anything. Now, I'm sure someone can think of a good explanation why it still would work, but I despise the idea that when I finally had this emotion of feeling this connection is robbed by the fact that in the normal route, this doesn't matter. Meanwhile, in the weird route that, let's be real here for a second, most people don't play, is the actual canon one. And I think that's just stupid. I think that's just bad. This is such a momentous moment about confirming that Sans Undertale and Sans Deltarune are the same person that I think it would really suck terribly bad that the actual route canon to Undertale would be blocked by something that the majority of people are not gonna play for one reason or another. At least to me, personally. This is a thing that has to mean something in all the routes. That it's not just locked by the worst one, if that makes sense. Sure, you could argue that it makes sense because, Sans is always associated with timey-wimey bullshit or something. And the weird route is anything but a normal route, right? That's why it's fucking called a weird route or something, right? But Sans hasn't really shown much relevance to the weird route in and of itself. There's clearly something going on. Let's not pretend there isn't. The fact that he's not showing the Ferris wheel up to the actual lake. There's definitely something going on, especially with the breadcrumbs and stuff. What the fuck that bread means, why Sans gives him that, it's not quite clear yet, but it might be an easy way to trail that path, I guess. I don't know. I do think it matters, but I think Sans should matter a little bit more in all the routes, if that makes sense, because Sans is weird in chapter 5, because a lot of people have started to clock that he knows more than he leads on, which is the typical Undertale thing, right? But I think, in Undertale, he's the most vulnerable, or not exactly vulnerable, but the most exposed about his whole deal in the genocide route. So it kind of would make sense that in the worst route we would have like a similar thing going on, but Deltarune is not Undertale, and I think in that sense it would make for a better story to see it in all the angles in different routes and not just have it locked in a single route here. Like in Undertale, it made sense for it to be like locked in a certain route if you think about it, because technically speaking, you can get quite a bit of information about it even without going that far. But going that far is the whole fucking point of Undertale. That's the whole point of determination in that game, right? That you just go over and over and over and over again until you like reach the end and there's nothing fucking left except for like, you know, whatever the fuck the Sans' deal is, right? Deltarune, on the other hand, you know, it's not really about Sans at all. It's not really supposed to be about him. He's definitely important to Deltarune, but it's not about him. Like, the whole reset factor is not part of it, and I think I would prefer if his deal was equally distributed and the weird route is solely reserved for Noelle and Chris, because at this point, this is their story. This is their deal. And whatever Sans is doing in the weird route could be adjacent to it, but I don't think he should be, again, a main factor in it. Does that make sense? Am I making sense to anybody here? Like, my main gripe with it is that this whole revelation feels kind of stupid if it only means something in the other route when I felt like it meant something in the main route already. And I feel like it would just feel kind of stupid when it actually didn't for the route that I played it on for the first time. And I feel like the weird route is so specifically more so about the soul, you know, taking advantage of Chris and taking advantage of Noelle and all that. Like, I feel like I don't think I want Sans to be that important to the weird route, I feel like. Like, he can be knowledgeable about it, he can be like somewhere in the background, but I don't think I want him to have much focus on that. And I feel like if he ends up being only, you know, canon to Undertale in the weird route, I feel like the only way that's gonna be possible is if he's getting directly involved. And I have a problem with that. I think if he is directly involved in anything, it should be in the normal route, not in the weird route, I think. That's Noelle's and Chris's story, I think. Or whatever Gaster's gonna do some bullshit on. I don't think Sans should be too involved in that, to me, personally. So I was just done editing my bit about the punch card, which is already really long already, but I just wanted to also include something that Thane Cooney brought up on Twitter, who probably brought in a pretty good explanation why it being Weird Route exclusive would kind of suck, and their point is essentially something I kind of similarly said before about it kind of doing again the thing about it being the worst route, but their point is essentially that it would be one, repetitious if his lore is exclusively only being explored in the evil route, but also that the idea of that we've already seen the happiest outcome in Undertale would be a little undermined if it came from like the worst part of Deltarune and not the happier one, which is a lot more tragic if you think about it. Like, I think there is something a lot more tragic in wanting to go back to the world that already has a good ending rather than one that is like the worst one, right? Not to necessarily mean that the weird route can't be canonical to Undertale, maybe there's something one could do with it, but only the weird route would really suck in this context. Anyway, that whole rant out of the way, let's talk about the rest of chapter 5, I guess. I feel like I talked quite a lot about it, and we haven't even gotten to the Dark World yet, which is extremely funny. So, getting into the Dark World is when I started to feel this, heavy bias towards it, where I felt like I was being played with, that nothing about it seems like anything that I expected, and started to feel a little betrayed almost from, like, my expectations. Like, I'm being so dead ass. When I first saw Flowery, when I first saw Flowery, I honestly felt so offended looking at him, and I already hated him before he even did a single thing Toriel say. I don't know exactly how to put it in a way that makes me sound sane, but looking at Flowery, especially when he name drops himself, all I could feel was anger at this, I don't know, Undertale OC-S bitch that was on my screen. I don't know how best to explain it. Like, Undertale OC just feels like the most accurate depiction of Flowery as a character design, I feel like. Like, I was expecting maybe Sans being involved, I was expecting maybe Alphys could have some relevancy, and I was obviously expecting Asgore to have, like, some big fucking relevance, and then there's just this blonde anime fucking twink with its own opening or something. I thought there was, like, an ad playing when it like, like went into like the 2D style or something. Like I was just, I had my hater glasses on and I was not having it for a good long while actually. I still had fun with it obviously because Flowery still was extremely funny from the very get-go, but as I was playing, it was just, I felt a genuine frustration. And while I was playing it for the first time, that was when I noticed while I was playing that, hold on, let's just breathe a little bit, give it a chance, see where this goes. And the more I let go of these expectations that I had, the more I kind of started to really understand what the story was going for, especially when we finally got to like the castle section, right? Before that, I was still like fighting with myself, like, ugh, this is not what I wanted. And the more I, told myself to shut the fuck up and just watch what's happening, the more I kind of just calmed down and really appreciate Flowery as a character, especially when you realize that he's kind of goated. In like a really strange way. My favorite antagonist is still gonna be Tenna, I feel like. Tenna or Queen. Like those two are kind of tied for this, I think. But Flowey is such an interesting antagonist. Because he's not really evil. He's not really trying to do an evil thing. Or he's not even trying to be malicious at all. He's just trying to help, his gay buddy, right? And this sincerity in his presentation is weirdly charming that it loops around to being actually kind of cool again. And I think this is where Toby is at his best, I think. When a character is trying to pretend to like act himself up to be something, and then somehow loops around to being exactly that, just not in the sense that they think they are. Like I said this somewhere with Susie and Papyrus, where it's like, these two will hype themselves up quite a bit, but where they shine is when they're being great unintentionally, or when they don't even realize that they're actually being great, but they do have great actions to them that speak louder than anything they could possibly be saying about themselves. And I think Flowery is a similar example of this. Now, what I found the most interesting about, the whole Flowery plotline is how Rousey specifically has beef with Flowery, right? And of course, we could talk about, like, the thematic reason for this, because Flowery is, like, in direct defiance of fate and just tries to go against it, even knowing fully well that it's inevitable. Meanwhile, Rousey is caging himself into this feeling of hopelessness about the prophecy, and the only thing that he can do about it is to try to be kind, because apparently the prophecies rely on everything being violent or something. I'm not quite certain about that, I will say, but there's clearly a pressure for Rousey to act a very specific way, because if he doesn't, everything is going to fall apart. And so there's this, constant headbutting about this. But then you also have the fact that Flowery is, let's be real here, a bit of a fucking dick about it. Like, the first few, hours or something, Flowery is just rage baiting Rousey quite a bit, and it's funny. Honestly, that's, probably my favorite part of the chapter, because while I 100% thought that Sans was gonna be the rage baiter, it ended up being Flowery instead, and that is 100 times more funny, not gonna lie. Because while we could talk all day about the thematic reason for this, there's also the interesting part that Rousey is like a kinder version of Flowey. Like, not Flowery, Flowey, Undertale Flowey. Like, if you remember, the whole introduction of, the battle system or something, Rousey will paraphrase Flowey quite often, and, Rousey is also being associated with flowers quite often, especially with, the t-shirt that was once on, Fangame or something, right? And, there's also, of course, the very obvious thing that Rousey looks kind of like Asriel, or at least feels like very much inspired by Asriel's look. So there's definitely some Flowey DNA going in there. So him having beef with another Flowey parallel, being so much more in your face about it too, is hilarious, but also so fucking fascinating. The first interpretation that I had going into this whole thing was honestly the idea that these two specifically headbutting feels like a reflection of how Flowey feels about himself almost. That there's the Rousey side in him that's still kinda there, absolutely hating that part of Flowery that seems to know exactly what he's doing, being blindsided by what's actually going on or something, hating each other in this part, being almost like a reflection of Flowey's self-hatred or something. I'm sure some people are gonna disagree on that. Maybe I'm overthinking this part, maybe, but I feel like it has this interesting reflection of like these two sides of the same coin, if that makes sense, right? I also had a bit of a thought the other day. I don't remember when I had that thought, but the fact that Flowery has his eyes closed is really interesting to me, because honestly, the more I look at the sprite and stuff, the more I felt like maybe this is a Frisk reference, like the tiniest bit. Now, like, we don't have that many characters that have like their eyes closed constantly, and in Deltarune it makes sense, because all the Deltarune main bosses or something, minus chapter 4, all the main bosses have like no eyes, basically. So Flower is like almost following that trend, but instead of having no eyes, he just has them closed all the time. Like a typical anime character. That makes sense. But I think there is something to be said about the character that has so much, determination in his heart being the one that has his eyes closed. I feel like there's a certain irony to it, So following this entire thing, Chapter 5 was a really cool experience, because not only are we introduced to all these new characters, especially like when we finally get to like the flowers and stuff that feel like representing the 6 human children at least a little bit. There's also the whole fact that there is just a complete, game mechanic change, because not only do we, somewhat keep the climbing mechanic for certain things, but we also get like a 2D platformer now, and that part is so fucking cool, actually. Like, honestly, if I had to think of the reason why the Castle Town and stuff doesn't really get any new additions, it's probably because the team is like trying to figure out different game mechanics for different Dark Worlds, and this has by far been the most fun I had in the replays, I think. Yeah, the first time was fucking hell, which is why I didn't get all the coins, or even remotely any more coins than just the fucking 2 I found the first time, by basically complete chance. But on a replay, it's honestly really fun to just try and do time things, right? To make sure that everything, flies in the right direction. And while as much as I fucking hate these circle flower jump plates, I don't know what the fuck call them. You know the one, the one where you actually have to like climb up or even go sideways in order to actually get some of these coins, like 2 of them. Like, those suck so bad, but trying to figure out how they actually function is really fucking fun. As much as I wanted to curse Toby's ancestors for this bit, it actually was a really fun experience trying to learn how to control that properly. Speaking of controller, I have heard that Hollow Knight players in particular have a really hard time with Hollow Knight when playing a controller, and that seems to be like the game mechanic in Chapter 5 seems to be really inspired by Hollow Knight. So maybe I've just been doomed from the fucking start. But that bit was still so fun. While I still want to talk about one thing that I do want to have a bigger discussion on, I want to change the direction a little bit and talk about Pink for just a second. Because Pink is so fascinating. So obviously, first time around, didn't meet Pink because I have skill issue, I guess. I also didn't clock that the person in the shop was also Pink, mostly because the art style is just completely different and the hair is definitely much shorter in the shop. I like to headcanon that this is her like human form, and then in the cat Mew Mew, this is like a magical transformation, a costume where her hair is longer and all that, kind of like Sailor Moon and stuff. You know what I'm talking about. Although I'm not sure if Sailor Moon actually grows her hair in its transformation. I think they're always long. You know what I mean. Now, I honestly never really thought much about what the connection is between the Shadow Crystal holders. The only thing that I had like a vague idea of is that, freedom motive, right? That all of them are trying to connect the theme of freedom in some way. With Javel, it made sense that he's like free of the notion of everything being like a video game, that he can just do whatever he fucking wants and stuff. Spanton is like trying to reach for freedom by not being this puppet, to escape this notion of being powerless and all that, or just being stuck in a video game in a sense. Chapter 3 is, I'm not even quite sure what the connection is there, I'm not gonna lie. I'm having a bit of trouble connecting stuff in there. Chapter 4 is very obvious, where it's like the freedom to, write your own story, to defy expectations and do exactly how you want your own story to end. That makes sense. And chapter 5 is like, it absolutely has something to do with, Pink's like transgenderness, right? Let's not sugarcoat words here. It's definitely supposed to be about like the, gender expression and just being free of the notion that you have to be the, assigned gender at birth, or freeing yourself from this feeling of perfection and stuff, or even free of your self-loathing if you want to go a bit farther into that discussion, right? So Mad Mew Mew absolutely fits that, but then there's a second layer to it, which was revealed to us by Sham this chapter, which is that the Shadow Crystals are actually more so a representation of lost dreams. That side note, absolutely screamed when it wasn't determination. I wanted to just crash my head into my desk. But I did actually see recently someone screenshotting a description about the item that you get during the Asgore fight, or, afterwards. You still keep the items of hopes and dreams. And the dreams one is, what was the description of it? It was like the goal of determination. So I feel like that's no coincidence, right? That this still has a big connection to it. But my goodness, is this game really trying to avoid the word determination? Anyway, so I remember when playing it a week ago for the first time, I saw the Mew Mew doll on the trash can. Well, I didn't quite understand what it was until Asgore said it was like an action figure, and then I actually properly understood what it was. Because the pixels were so small that I didn't quite get what it was at first. But once I clocked it, it was like, oh, are we gonna get Mew Mew in the chapter? That'd be so dope. But by the time I finished the chapter, I completely forgot about it. When doing the boss fight after I already did the weird route, I had it in my mind again just before entering the boss room that, hey, wait a minute, wasn't there like a Matt Mew Mew doll outside? Maybe it has something to do with her. I didn't quite know what to expect in regards to Matt Mew Mew, but I feel like something about her is gonna come back. And I mean, just look at this clip. Falter. Whoever's making orange blue, the strongest flower will punish you. The prettiest soldier of Asgore 7 colored flowers. Yeah! I was deadass so fucking happy to see Matt Mew Mew again in a context where you can actually play it and isn't just exclusive to the Switch or something. That was really fun. What wasn't fun was the fact that the purple soul mode came back. I was expecting it to come back. I did not expect it to come back this fucking hard. Now, personally, and I don't know how it is with other people, but I've never really been good with the soul modes in Undertale. I feel like the soul modes have always beaten my fucking ass. The only reason why I really like the yellow soul mode is because it's basically just an arcade, just doing shooty shoots. That's just fun. That's just fun to do. There's nothing fun about just trying to force yourself out of the gravity with blue. There's nothing fun about trying to dodge arrows in green. There's nothing fun about orange that's speeding through things and just crashing your face into a wall. Now, and there is certainly nothing fun about being restricted by your movements as much as you do during purple soul mode. It was fun and it was really cool to see it come back, but I also wanted to curse Toby's ancestors for it. I already did want to curse them before, but now they're double cursed. Jokes aside, the mechanic is really fun, although fuck those bomb attacks. I know I'm not the first person to complain about the bomb attacks. I think everyone unanimously agrees that the bombs are fucking awful. I do, however, feel like there's a bit of the disagreement about whether or not it's a good mechanic or something, because I've seen some people being like, it's not a hard, you just need to make sure you're not in the grid where the bombs are, which is like, no fucking shit, Sherlock! What do you think we're all trying to do? I'm sorry. Are people thinking that we're not trying to do that? That we're fucking blind? Of course we're trying to focus on the bombs, whether they're gonna hit or not. I think the biggest problem with, the bomb section is that, your soul is obviously purple, but then there's also, the dots that are purple, right? The little circles that you, land on or something during the bomb section. And, when you do, try to dodge them and there's, this blur effect or something, and there's just so much visual effects happening. I don't know if it's a design flaw necessarily, or maybe it is the intention, I don't know. But to me, at least, I cannot actually see where my soul is with all these special effects happening, especially with my soul also being purple alongside with the dots. So sometimes I just straight up couldn't see where my soul was. Now, I don't know if I would necessarily call it a design flaw, but it definitely feels like maybe a tiny bit of an oversight. Just a little bit. I feel like there is something going on that's maybe not completely compliant with, I don't know, the Geneva Conventions of Gaming? I don't know what to call that. It feels like it's a bit... I think there's something to be talked about there. Maybe? I don't know. Is my high-pitched voice convincing you yet? I do think that she fits the theme of the Shadow Crystals, pink in general, but I can also understand why it was a little bit confusing as to how she fits with everyone else. I know some people got a little bit disappointed about how unpredictable the Shadow Crystal holders are, and it doesn't really feel like there's a bit of any real unity to it. And I think the mistake came from having a direct connection with Jevil and Spamton back to back. I think that was probably the biggest mistake Toby made in this, because that made everyone think that these two would have like traits to them that, you know, connects them together and would be the thorough line that happens in every other boss or something. And instead, we have like, I don't know, a grandpa turtle that even didn't even use the shard, alongside with an anime cat girl that also decided to not use it. And then we have the clusterfuck that is chapter 3, which no one can decide how to label any of this, because you can't even call the knight the secret boss, because everyone will be like, it's not a secret boss or something, that's Iram. And it's like, okay, Iram, I guess, technically counts as a secret boss, but he's not the one who gives me the fucking shard, now is he? Now, I don't even know how to even approach chapter 3, I think, in that regard. But I still find the discussion about this interesting, because now, the one who feels out of place has kind of changed to me, at least. Because, you know, Spamton uses Mettaton's body, which is a lost dream of Mettaton's. In chapter 3, you could argue it's maybe like a lost dream of, you know, Chris's, or rather a lost nightmare, you could almost say. Or if we're talking about more Shadow Crystal specifically, you could also argue that, you know, if the knight turns out to be Des, then it would be Des's lost dream, that the knight is like the manifestation of Des's lost dream or something. And the knight is definitely representing at least a lost dream, because when you break off the shard, that's literally the Shadow Crystal. So, well, you get the black shard and the Shadow Crystal. Might I also just add, I know people get upset when you confuse the Shadow Crystal and the black shard, but also, I mean, Shadow and black, crystal and shard, like, you couldn't, I don't blame people for, like, confusing the two a little bit, because at this point, those are just synonyms being different items. Now, of course, a crystal isn't necessarily a shard, but a shard could be part of a crystal, maybe. I don't know, this is a fucking Venn diagram or whatever. Then we have Gerson, who's definitely in result to, like, a lost dream of Alvin's or something. You can, of, like, you know, a lost dream of being a writer or something. You can definitely connect it to that. And then Matt Mew Mew's is, kind of very obvious, but also really tragic idea of, like, the lost dream of, like, the ideal body, or, like, the ideal self, of, like, the lost dream of, you know, loving yourself. Like, that's fucking sad. So now comes the question, what is the lost dream on Jevil? Is he representative of Chris's lost dream or Azrael's lost dream? I'm being specific to these two because if you remember in chapter 4, there's like a part where Susie calls out a drawing that these two have made on the computer, and one of the characters that are like shown in that drawing is Sham. And we know that Sham and Jevil are like, you know, toxic yaoi having going on there, right? Or rather doomed yaoi, whatever. Like Sham, they are so interconnected with Jevil that I feel like at this point it's like very much connected to either Azrael or Chris. Now, I like the idea of Azrael because I have this little headcanon right now where maybe Azrael wasn't, you know, or maybe he was a little pressured to go for a more safe kind of study and not for like video game design or something. So maybe the shard is like a lost dream of becoming a video game developer or something. And that's why Jevil is like so obsessed with like games and stuff. And that's why he also figured out that his world is essentially a video game or something. That's my idea. There's also some ideas and parallels with like, you know, Chris going on. I don't want to dismiss that, but that's just a personal thing that I have right now because we don't really have much about Azrael at this point. Just ending off the Matt Mew Mew section a little bit. In general, her being in the game honestly was just so fun again, and you know, God. This very last minute insertion that Toby put in to give Friend more aura is really funny, especially after people had like been slandering Friend for like a good few days about how he's been doing fucking nothing, and now there's like a fucking nuclear lore drop. You have to also remember that the one talking about this is not Mad Dummy, but rather the Darkner Mew Mew doll, right? So you're getting this story heard by, like,
an anime cat girl, Mew.
Yeah, like, imagine you get, like, the biggest fucking scare of your life coming out of a goddamn cat girl, right?
You're about to be mauled to death, Mew. Be careful not to have any protein on you, or it's gonna bite you very, very hard to break your bones, Mew. Nobody's going to find your body parts in the depths of the ocean, Mew.
Like, can you imagine that? That's terrifying! And that's, you know, ignoring the fucking banger that is, like, Mew Mew's, like, new battle theme. What was it called? Like, Cutie Mew Mew Magic? What was it called like that? That I honestly kind of want to make a cover of this, and also, like, the meme parody song that was going around. You know the one. But I made enough covers, and they got copyrighted real fast, and I don't really want that right now. While I was playing it, I definitely did recognize Hatsune Miku in there, but I think I was just so not surprised that Toby Fox would put in Hatsune Miku in a video game. Like, I feel like that was just a fucking given at this point, so I wasn't as phased as I probably was supposed to be. I keep seeing so many compilations of people, like, reacting to it, and everyone is just going, Hatsune Miku! But you know what? Fair reaction. It should have flabbergasted me as well. I don't know why I wasn't, honestly. Now, I could be talking about the weird route and how absolutely fucking terrifying it is, but that whole clip is also like 20 minutes long. Like, it's not much. Like, even when you go around the finished festival, it's really not that long. And I mean, it was fucking terrifying, and my hands are still cramping, honestly, from like trying to get to, you know, drown these teenagers. Like, I actually messed it up the first time because I didn't quite get that I was supposed to, like, you know, spam it all the time. Like, not only did I have to click confirm, but I also have to click left or right. No, so it wasn't just my thumb doing all the work. I had to, like, use both my thumbs for this. Not gonna lie, I didn't quite know how to feel about Noelle's, like, you know, facial sprites, because it felt like really, really fucking out of character. Not gonna lie, with how she, like, you know, distorted her face as much as she did. It was like, it felt like an explosion of emotions that I felt like was so eerie to look at. But then I thought about two facts. One, Noelle has so obviously been holding back her emotions for like a long time, so having a massive crasher like that is kind of, I don't know, it's not that surprising, honestly. And then the second part that I think a lot of people are forgetting about is the Thorn Ring. I think the Thorn Ring is, the way that I've interpreted it, honestly, is that the Thorn Ring has like almost saved the progress of the weird route, like from chapter 2, it like saved the level she was at, and as we know, level of violence gives it the capacity to like hurt further, right? It actively influences how you look at everything, right? And how it transforms you into a worse person. And I feel like the Thorn Ring might be like uploading her kill stat, I guess, into her veins or something. And so I think the Thorn Ring kind of made her just the slightest bit insane. Now, I don't know, that's just how I looked at it. But enough about that. Now, we went through everything about all this, but now I want to actually talk about something that I've been itching to talk about, which is Asgore. Now, I think we all remember when I talked about Asgore in that one video about how Deltarune relates back to Undertale thing, and I think a lot of people had the impression that I really dislike Asgore. That's not the case. I do actually really like Asgore. I do like how complex of a character he can be and is a very nuanced kind of person, right? And I do appreciate him for that. I think Toby has a specific approach to writing Asgore that I am in disagreement with, I think. And I feel like chapter 5 has a similar symptom to it. And I want to explain myself properly because I don't think what I'm about to say is what people think I'm about to say. A lot of people, I had assumed that maybe Asgore would become like, you know, a final boss or something, right? That we would have like a rematch, but this time with the Asgore that actually wants to kill you and not someone who has to because of duty or something, right? Like a version of Asgore that we didn't get to see in Undertale and only heard of, like the one who's like angry, the one who's like full of malice, the kind of malice that wanted to kill the entire human race. That's the perception that all of us had about Asgore. Now, getting into chapter 5, I think one of the reasons why I was a little salty at the beginning wasn't just because, like, you know, Sans or Alphys wasn't around, but also because Asgore was surprisingly a little absent for a while. Which is kind of insane to think about because this is literally his chapter. This is literally his dark world in the Flower King flower shop, right? It should be about him. But the more you really analyze the chapter, it is about him. It's just not about him in present. If you really think about it, the way that the characterization of Asgore is being formatted in the Flower King is not much different than it is in Undertale, really, where characters will tell you about Asgore. Like, for example, Seth talks about how, you know, he reads bedtime stories to the flowers at night, which is kind of sad, but it's there's still something endearing about it, right? And you hear about all these perceptions that these flowers have about what it means to be human, what it means to be in support of Asgore, and that obviously has been, you know, influenced by the people around him, not by the people that were an influence on him. Like, Blue is very clearly supposed to be a mirror to Toriel, right? Like, this character with so much grace and integrity forgiving this one character who's like supposed to be the face of justice, who is also extremely suicidal. Little side note on that, actually. I had started a script about basically the sequel to Deltarune relates to Undertale. Now, basically going Undertale relates back to Deltarune. But this chapter has kind of not exactly changed the talking points, but they needed an update because of what's happening in chapter 5. Yeah, because there were some assumptions made for chapter 5, and obviously I can't do that anymore now because we have chapter 5. But something that I found interesting is that the justice guy is suicidal, which is interesting considering that, Asgore used to be a cop, or if you think about Undertale for a second, how he has a section where he wants to kill himself if, Flowey doesn't, intervene or something, right? I think that's a very clear parallel going on here. There's the obvious thing going on with the Science Soul being kind of similar to Chris, like how Aqua seems to be like the perception that Asgore had on Chris and being like almost a parallel to it. Green seems to be like the genuine nature of Asgore, who's he is at heart. If I had to think about the nature of Orange, I think it's supposed to represent the inner like anger issues that Asgore actually has inside him and is being reflected by Orange in some way. There's a lot going on with the flowers that the more you really get into it, you realize it's not that different from Undertale and how everyone like talks about Asgore and describes him and hypes him up that way instead of actually getting to see him. And so that it creates this parallel where it's like almost the opposite, where in Undertale it's like a mix match of like positive and negative opinions. Meanwhile, the flowers kind of try to keep a positive thing to him, but are also reflecting bad sides of him in their own characters. Does that make any sense? Because I feel like, everyone's trying to figure out what the flowers really represent, and I think there was one video that actually went into it pretty well. Yeah, so I think it's going for a similar thing, and I think that's how Toby likes to write Asgore, where everyone is giving an impression of Asgore, and that's how you get like a more complete picture of who Asgore is as a person. So frankly, I don't really mind the fact that Asgore is not really as, visually present as he probably could have been, because that's just how he's being written, in the sense by being perceived by outside forces, by outside influences, giving us this story instead. And the real Asgore that we see is when we see all of that in combination and see how truly broken of a man he really is, just like Undertale, really. The problem with Undertale is that it was kind of being made fun of, and Deltarune kind of feels like it was tethering towards it again, but I feel like there is a genuine attempt at the end to make Asgore be taken seriously and actually also genuinely learn his lesson, like actually being, remorseful and actually changing his outlook on things, right? That not just, wallowing in his self-pity or something. And this is where Undertale is really important, because if you really think about it, the switch up at the end actually makes a lot more sense. I have some gripes with it, which I will explain, but on paper, it actually makes a lot of sense, because when I went on Twitter and saw people like, screenshotting the part where he says that he wants to parade the Dark Fountain Maker's body across town or something, I couldn't quite tell how many people were serious or not, but it really did feel like some people took this declaration seriously, and that makes me feel like a lot of people fell for Undertale Asgore's hype moments and aura, if that makes sense. Think about it this way. Sans, for a long time, was mostly seen as the aura farmer guy who's just, so cool with his glowing eye, and a lot of people for a long time only saw him that way, right? And it wasn't until, I want to say, 2023 or something, where people really, started to really dig into who Sans is as a person. And, I went through it myself as well. You know the video, but there is a very clear muddying over a character once they only think about his, like, biggest feats, I guess, is the best way I can put it. And then kind of not really digging deeper into who this character is outside of that, right? And then there's also the context missing for why this happens in the first place. And for Asgore, I think there were a lot of people, that got the impression because of, characters like Undyne or something, or of the final fight, that he's like this big man who's like out for revenge or something, who's like a strong, very competent leader and stuff. Even though in Undertale we have really clear confirmation that it was mostly Toriel who was like, the brains over the operations. That's not not to say that Asgore can't be competent, but you can very clearly tell that Asgore isn't really meant to be like someone who wants to be this violent king. What we do know about Asgore, however, is that he can get extremely emotional and angry really fast. Now in Undertale, we never actually got to see that exactly, but we were always told, especially with the Undertale section in New Home, where people talk about how in his rage he declared war on humanity and stuff. And I'm glad that we got to see this emotional wreck that is Asgore in Deltarune, to see how he actually acts when he is in this tunnel vision of anger. What I think a lot of people miss, or at least forget about, is the end of the fight in Undertale, where Asgore just straight up admits that he does not want to hurt anybody. Not to mention that he also brings up that it gave people hope. It gave people finally a reason to, have some hopes and dreams in their hearts again, right? And he basically trapped himself with this duty that was caused by anger. And because of characters like Undyne, who really looked up to him for that decision, he couldn't back down from it. And that's why he was trapped with this duty that he had to fulfill. And you can tell, because, again, he kills himself if you don't want to kill him, if Flowey doesn't, intervene. He literally would rather die than to cause a war. And let's not forget that despite him killing 6 children, which is, a pretty big fucking deal, let's not forget about that, but he waited, instead of as Toriel mentioned, that if he really wanted to cause a war, he could have stopped at the first, soul and just caused it there. Now, I want to make it clear, Toriel was just being, hypothetical about this. This is not what she herself would have done. It's just her point that if he really wanted to cause war, he would have done it so much sooner. And that's just to show that Asgore never meant to actually do this. It was just the result of his anger pouring out that trapped him in this sense of duty, and so he was trying to delay it as much as he possibly could. Because I don't think it was easy in his mind to just go, hey guys, I know I was having a bit of a bad moment because my children died and stuff, but I actually kind of want to back out. I don't really want to do this anymore, so can we just go back to just being on the ground and trying to be kind of happy about it? Well, how is that? No, that was not gonna happen. People were so on board with the idea, there was no fucking way he could, damage control it at this point, or at least that's the perception he had on it. And when we think about all of this in relation to Deltarune, his sudden switch up actually makes a lot of sense, because if you put it in the perspective of Undertale, he was in this same kind of angered tunnel vision where he wanted to brute force a solution in his anger and was just festering in it inside, being blindsided by how angry he was by this incident that happened, right? Just completely enveloped in this inner anger and not letting anybody have him calm down about it. That he was just mentally stuck with it. And, Flowery and the flowers, they tried to steer him away from it, but not in a very direct way, which is why he ended up not really listening to them anymore. And it's only when Chris is hurt, his own child, that he finally snaps out of this tunnel vision and managed to get out of this spiral of anger within his mind before it was too late. And that's when, he was able to really reconcile with himself, no, this is not the kind of person that I am. It's just the person that I thought I had to be in order to fix this whole mess. That when he talked about the fact that he had self-hatred issues, that made a lot of sense to me. Yes, this man fucking hates himself. He's suicidal, really. This man is not happy whatsoever. And it made perfect sense that completely blinded him in pursuit of trying to fix something that no one even asked him to do. So to me at least, the sudden switch up the moment he saw Chris hurt actually makes so much sense. But there is one part of it that I dislike, and I think it has to do with a pacing issue of it. The last time we see Asgore we don't actually see Asgore that well. He's just kind of in the other side of the plateau or something, somewhere in the top castle where he's just kind of aura farming and stuff, right? Yeah, just kind of standing there, looking back and hoping that everything goes well, just waiting at the fountain and stuff. That's the last time we see him until we get to the final end of the flowery fight. And I think the pacing pacing of it would have been conveyed better if in the middle of like this whole running section, we still got to see Asgore in the background. I can't quite put into words exactly what needed there to happen, but I think there needed to be like a moment where he's like starting to doubt himself a little bit, or being a bit curious about what the ruckus is about, what Flowery is doing, and what the other flowers are, dealing with right now. And maybe he's like assuming that this is like, oh, the fountain maker is now approaching, so I'm gonna stand ready for them right now or something. Yeah, like I think there needed to be like a scene like this, but the more that he watched, the more he's realizing that this isn't the fountain maker, or technically it is, but it's not who he thinks it is. And somewhere in the background, you need to start like seeing like, hold on, wait a second, is that Chris? Yeah, like I think the biggest problem with the switch up is that Asgore like just comes from out of screen or something where we hadn't seen him in a while, and I think that's the biggest issue. Now, of course, I do think that the flowers maybe took up a little bit too much screen time. Like Toby was definitely so fucking excited to like finally show the personalities of like the 7 like colors and stuff. Like I think he was just so fucking excited that he kind of forgot to give Asgore just the tiniest bit more screen time. And I think this is what I mean with like the method that Toby likes to write Asgore. I think Toby prefers writing Asgore in a very implicit way rather than being in your face about it. Like I think that's also the reason why he's making Asgore vague posts and stuff. Now I personally don't mind that, because I feel like this is the first time this story like acknowledges that something happened on a certain day. Like there's always been like a connection with death something happening in Noelle's life, but I think this is the first time where the story is explicitly saying that whatever happened to Des seems to be connected with whatever happened with Asgore, just not very directly. And I think the reason why he's being vague is because there's gonna be more expansion later, and there can be some disagreement about whether or not he should have just at this point just been more direct about it at this point. But personally, I feel like it's a bit too early to judge that. Like, and maybe it's just me, I feel like when it comes to like revelations and stuff, this is just something that needs to be taken with the context of the rest of the story to really see, is this bad pacing or not, right? Like, is this like unnecessarily withholding information for no reason, or was there a good reason to like withhold it for a little bit longer? Yeah, I don't know. I personally don't have an issue with it. The only issue I have is that Asgore needed just the tiniest bit more screen time, and I think this is just the way that Toby likes to write Asgore specifically, because honestly, he doesn't really do this as much with other characters outside of Asgore. If you think about it, like a lot of the other characters usually get like, they get some indirect kind of development going on, but usually that is being, put together with like actual scenes where they also do this thing, or at least, do something similar to that, right? Yeah, like, example, again, Sans in Undertale. We see him lazy, we see him just kind of cracking jokes, we see him doing some stuff that gives him a pretty good idea of who he is, but then we get characters like Papyrus indicating like, wait a minute, he's not as open as we think he is, he's not as relaxed maybe as you might want us to think he is, or something like that. Now, like, there's something going on with him that's a bit deeper, and then in a general run, you can see like, oh, that's what they were talking about. Now, like, with other characters, there's usually a balance between characters that are being spoken about versus what we see them actually do. And I think, genuinely, Toby has this habit with Asgore specifically that he wants him to be explored outside of what we actually see of him. And I do think it's really cool that we see some indirect things happening about Asgore's life and his, emotions and stuff through the flowers. But in turn, if because it's so indirect, it makes it feel like Asgore himself doesn't really get the limelight he might need. And honestly, I feel like there's just a scene missing between the last time we see him and the end of Flowery's fight. Like, I can't quite tell you exactly what needs to be played out, but there's just a single scene missing that's preventing it from it being tied together. Because even when on my first playthrough, that felt kind of out of whack. And even on my replay, it felt like something in between is missing. Like Gaster just swallowed a scene from the storyboards of of how they structured the cutscene or something. Like, something is missing. I don't know what it is, but something is missing, and it's actively making me upset because everything else about this chapter is so fucking good, aside my personal gripe about the festival not being as involved as it could be, but it's so good, and the fact that this bothers me And the unfortunate reality of it is also that Asgore is probably done having character development anymore at this point. Because from now on, I feel like we're gonna be like going into the, you know, the whole thing with the bunker or like the Holiday Mansion. Like a lot of people think the Holiday Mansion might be the next Dark World or the hospital. I think the hospital is less likely just because I feel like there's just not enough objects that we can see in the hospital that would actually feel like they're gonna make for a really interesting character designs or like an interesting Dark World. That like maybe it's just me. I feel like the Holiday Mansion just feels more like something that can work with a proper theme to it. Like we already had like the doctor stuff going on in Cyberworld if you think about it because of like the city aspect. Like I don't think we're gonna go into the hospital itself. I think the mansion is a bit more of a safer bet, but this could age horrendously within a year, so you know, don't listen to me too much. Regardless of that, unfortunately, I think Asgore is now done with his part in the story, and now we're gonna focus on like the holiday situation about, you know, Carol, Noelle, maybe the night as well at this point again, and perhaps get a bit more meat onto Toriel, because I feel like the fact that the Asgore did mention that she's like, you know, struggling financially and stuff, I feel like that's gonna come back. Like I feel like that wasn't mentioned out of nowhere. I do feel like Toriel is going to become important. It's just maybe a little difficult to tell exactly how she's gonna be important right now, because she also needs to, like, you know, deal with her own issues of avoidance, right? And I think that does kind of matter. So unfortunately, I think we're kind of done with Asgore. Do I think Sans still has a chance to be in the Dark World? Honestly, I don't know at this point, because I'm having a bit of a hard time thinking about, you know, because Flower King, I could imagine that, you know, Sans maybe wants to, like, buy a flower or something, and that's why he gets, like, wrapped into, like, the Dark World or something. That was my assumption about Chapter 5. Or something that a lot of people assumed alongside with me is maybe thinking that, you know, Sans might be trying to babysit or something, the Fun Gang or something in the Light World, and then like follows them into the Dark World or whatever because of, you know, another promise from Toriel or something. In the mansion, like, I feel like you need to think like 10, 11, 20, 66 kind of steps to justify why Sans would be in the Holiday Mansion. Like that there, the connection is a little difficult. I will say though, I think there is something cute about how Noelle actually finds Sans so chill. Like the funniest bit that I did on my replay is to, instead of going like, we love him, just have Chris finally just be honest and say we actually kind of fucking hate him or something. And there's this bit where Noelle just reacts to like everyone having beef with him and going, hello, what did he do? Because, like, yes, from her perspective, what the fuck has he done, right? He's just a chill guy. Someone pointed out that the reason Noelle is most likely really chill with Sans is because he is probably the most similar to Rudy out of everyone in Hometown. And, you know, that makes a lot of sense, actually. These two are, like, jokester dad energy kind of guys, if you think about it. So, maybe if we cope really, really, really hard, we could imagine that maybe because of that, for some unclearable reason, Sans might be involved, but at this point, I think it's better to shoot for Chapter 7 at this point. I still don't think he's gonna be, like, massively important to, like, the finale or something, but I feel like Chapter 7 might be the best shot for, you know, Sans to be in a Dark World, but if I'm wrong, of course, I'm not gonna be, you know, be upset about it. Just like I wouldn't be upset if Toriel somehow did get confirmed somehow. I'm happy to be wrong whenever it leads to a better outcome, you know, like the god blessing of Sans not being in the fucking house in Chapter 5's beginning, like, that was, like, my biggest fucking fear. I'm so glad I was wrong about that. I forgot to say this, because technically speaking, I did say it in the end of the replay of Chapter 5, but I do think there is something also beautiful about seeing the characterization of the souls. And while I'm sure most of us have kind of agreed that it's not supposed to be, like, one-to-one how the humans were exactly like, mostly because I think some of them are adults, and I think it was, like, described in at least a localization or something that they're all children, like, they were all supposed to be children. Like, it was never said in the game itself, but I think Toby did clarify that there were, like, actual children that all went down the underground. But just to have, like, a vague idea, like, I talked about this in the video, where it's like, while it is not one-to-one, it gives us a bit of context of what it might have been like. And I think Aqua is, like, the best proof to assume that the flowers were actually designed and thought of before Undertale, because I feel like there is a really funny combination of the bow being lost alongside inside a toy knife. And that has always felt like kind of a weird combination. And now that we see the context reutilized in Deltarune, it's like, oh, yeah, okay, yeah, that makes sense actually now. Like, that doesn't make any sense outside of it, I feel like. But just this massive contrast between how these souls, the soul colors, children, were a victim of Asgore's, self-hatred in a sense, are now being like the manifestation of how much they love Asgore in return. And it almost felt like a really bittersweet goodbye to the souls, if that makes sense. Like, maybe they're not one-to-one, but it feels like a closure to something that you've always felt while playing Undertale. Yeah, so now that we're nearing our finished recording, and hopefully I can cut it down, because as I'm seeing, it's been 2-3 hours. The other recording was like another hour, so we have 4 hours of rambling going on, so I hope I can cut this down. So I'm gonna be very briefly talking about the drawing I've been showing in the speed paint. So if you remember from the about Sans video, you might be noticing that this looks suspiciously similar to it. Well, that's because it is the exact same picture, just replacing Sans with Flowery. Of course, like every artist playing Deltarune, I had been thinking about how to like draw stuff from chapter 5, but I also wanted to like wait until it was a bit more safe to like draw something that's a bit more spoilery, right? Yeah, but I also couldn't quite think of what to draw exactly of chapter 5, and unfortunately, every time I thought about it, I was like, Flowery would strike the pose that Sand is doing in that one film wallpaper, wouldn't he? Like, unfortunately, this is like the perfect pose for him, for the kind of person Flowery is, so unfortunately, I felt like, you know what, let's do an update of the already aged milk kind of wallpaper that the previous one is, and just turn it into cheese instead. Yeah, this drawing was honestly kind of difficult to do, because the original was really hinging on the pink jacket being a really strong contrast to the golden flowers, so it was kind of difficult to make it work with values and stuff. I tried to like use the color flowers to maybe give some like imply kind of shapes kind of thing, like to just make it easier for some of the characters to like be seen. Like Yellow in particular sucked fucking ass trying to include him into the picture, because he was of course the same color as Flowery, except he's just I don't know, just a bit more greener, I guess, in the direction, just more purely yellow, but he also has orange at the same time as well. So trying to include him into the picture was fucking hell. Drawing all the different flowers was also really cute. I like that. I like that Green just looks like a Muppets character. It's really adorable. And one thing, I think my favorite bit of this entire thing was switching the places of Susie and Ralsei. So instead of having Susie being like angry and Ralsei being the one flailing, midair, it's Susie like trying to get the hang of like the feather thing, and Ralsei having beef with Flowery, right? I'm gonna be honest, I still prefer the Sans version. The Sans version is still my actual wallpaper, but this one, unfortunately, is a lot more in line with the actual chapter. And look, there is something fun about the fact that Deltarune Chapter 5 basically forced me to draw a human again that isn't Chris or Frisk. There's not really much else to say. There's just some fun little details on it, just having the feather in there alongside with Susie, the little book that's like falling out from Seth. I think in the middle of drawing it, you can actually see me going from the black hair on Seth to like a hoodie, because that's the exact moment that I saw like that one tweet that revealed that the black part of Seth's costume is actually a hood and not their actual hair. Small things like the flailing of Susie and Chris and Asgore are just straight up copy pasted, because I'm not drawing them again. They look perfect the way they are. I'm not wasting time on that. And then, of course, there's Blue just elegantly hugging his boyfriend, meanwhile also trying to put away the gun to his head. Just having a lovely picture. I will leave in the description a version of this image that you can buy on Ko-Fi. But honestly, you could also like go on my Twitter and just right-click it. But you could also just, give me money. I think that'd be nice. Anyway, I think at this point, the recordings have become really, really fucking long, and at this point, I already have an aneurysm trying to think about how to cut this down. I hope there's more so pauses, and then I can just cut that out. I don't know. We'll see. Anyway, thank you for listening to my podcast, I guess, at this point. And I'll see you next time, hopefully for another video essay, but don't count on it. We might be shifting gears again. Who knows, maybe I'm cooking again. See ya!